what she found.
And she learned that this new discovery supports the biblical accounts of King David and his son Solomon.
The tomb of King Solomon, a renowned figure in the Bible, was recently discovered by scientists after being lost for 3,000 years. As the tomb was opened, a series of mysteries that had been buried for millennia came to light. What exactly is in this king's tomb that caused scientists to search for it for such a long time? What is special about its structure, and how is it related to history? Join us as we uncover what was buried alongside King Solomon. King Solomon's tomb is found. For centuries, scholars have searched in vain for any remnant of Solomon's temple. The fabled Jerusalem sanctuary, described in such exacting detail in 1 Kings 6, was no doubt one of the most stunning achievements of King Solomon in the Bible. Yet nothing of the building itself has been found because excavation on Jerusalem's Temple Mount, the site of the Temple of King Solomon, is impossible. Fortunately, several Iron Age temples discovered throughout the Levant bear a striking resemblance to the Temple of King Solomon in the Bible. Through these remains, we gain extraordinary insight into the architectural grandeur of the building that stood atop Jerusalem's Temple Mount nearly 3,000 years ago. As reported by archaeologist John Monson, the closest known parallel to the Temple of King Solomon is the Ain Dara Temple in northern Syria. Nearly every aspect of the Ain Dara Temple, its age, its size, its plan, its decoration, parallels the vivid description of the Temple of King Solomon in the Bible. In fact, Monson identified more than 30 architectural and decorative elements shared by the Ain Dara structure and the Jerusalem Temple described by the biblical writers. The similarities between the Ain Dara Temple and the temple described in the Bible are indeed striking. Both buildings were erected on huge artificial platforms built on the highest point in their respective cities. The buildings likewise have similar tripartite plans, an entry porch supported by 2 columns, a main sanctuary hall. The hall of the Ain Dara Temple is divided between an antechamber and a main chamber, and then, behind a partition, an elevated shrine, or Holy of Holies. They were also both flanked on 3 of their sides by a series of multi-storied rooms and chambers that served various functions. Even the decorative schemes of Ain Dara Temple and the temple described in the Bible are similar. Nearly every surface, both interior and exterior, of the Ain Dara Temple was carved with lions, cherubim, and sphinxes, and floral and geometric patterns. The same imagery that, according to 1 Kings 6:29, adorned the Temple of King Solomon in the Bible. It is the date of the Ain Dara Temple, however, that offers the most compelling evidence for the authenticity of the biblical Temple of King Solomon. The Ain Dara Temple was originally built around 1300 BC and remained in use for more than 550 years until 740 BC. The plan and decoration of such majestic temples no doubt inspired the Phoenician engineers and craftsmen who built Solomon's grand edifice in the 10th century BC. As noted by Lawrence Stager of Harvard University, the existence of the Ain Dara Temple proves that the biblical description of Solomon's temple was neither an anachronistic account based on later temple archetypes nor a literary creation. The plan, size, date, and architectural details fit squarely into the tradition of sacred architecture from North Syria and probably Phoenicia, from the 10th to 8th centuries BC. Certain features of the Ain Dara Temple also provide dramatic insight into ancient Near Eastern conceptions of gods and the temples in which they were thought to reside. Carved side by side in the threshold of the Ain Dara Temple are 2 gigantic footprints. As one enters the antechamber of the sanctuary, there is another carving of a right foot, followed 30 feet away, at the threshold between the antechamber and the main chamber, by a carving of a left foot. The footprints, each of which measures 3 feet in length, were intended to show the presence and enormity of the resident deity as he or she entered the temple and approached his or her throne in the Holy of Holies. Indeed, the 30-foot stride between the oversized footprints indicates a god who would have stood 65 feet tall. In Solomon's temple, the presence of a massive throne, formed by the wings of two giant cherubim with 17-foot wingspans, may indicate that some Israelites envisaged their god, Yahweh, in a similar manner. King Solomon's wall found. A 3,000-year-old defensive wall possibly built by King Solomon has been unearthed in Jerusalem, according to the Israeli archaeologist who led the excavation. The discovery appears to validate a Bible passage, she says. The 10th century BC wall is 230 feet long and about 20 feet tall. It stands along what was then the edge of Jerusalem, between the Temple Mount, still Jerusalem's paramount landmark, and the ancient city of David, today a modern-day Arab neighborhood called Silwan. The stone barrier is part of a defensive complex that includes a gatehouse, an adjacent building, and a guard tower, which has been only partially excavated, according to Eilat Mazar, who led the dig for the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Over the years, the structures have been partially demolished, their building materials scavenged for later structures, and what remained was buried under rubble, Mazar said. The Bible's first book of Kings, widely believed to have been written centuries after the time period in question, says Solomon, king of Israel, built a defensive wall in Jerusalem. Mazar says that the new discovery is the first archaeological evidence of this structure. Ancient artifacts found in and around the complex pointed Mazar to the 10th century BC date. We don't have many kings during the 10th century that could have built such a structure, basically just David and Solomon, she said. According to the Bible, King David, of David and Goliath fame, was the father of King Solomon, who is said to have built the first temple of Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. Ceramics found near the wall helped narrow the date down, being of a level of sophistication common to the second half of the 10th century BC, King Solomon's time, according to Mazar. 1-meter-tall earthenware storage vessels were found near the gatehouse, one of them with a Hebrew inscription indicating the container belonged to a high-ranking government official. Figurines typical of 10th century BC Jerusalem, including four-legged animals and large-breasted women likely symbolizing fertility, were also uncovered, as were jar handles bearing impressions reading, "To the King," and various Hebrew names, she said. The artifacts may hint at the area's street life in biblical times. Here ancient Jerusalemites would have gathered around the wall's city gated to trade, settle disputes via street-side judges, engage in ritual practices, and stock up on water and supplies for treks out of the city, Mazar said. First Solomon's Temple-era artifacts ever found on Temple Mount. Archaeologists presented new details of what they said were the first tiny artifacts, unearthed in situ on the Temple Mount, ever conclusively dated to the time of the first temple about 3,000 years ago. The discoveries were made during limited scientific excavations carried out atop the Flashpoint Temple Mount in the past decade, the first of their kind since the British Mandate. The highly sensitive Israeli excavations were conducted with minimum publicity in cooperation with the Islamic Waqf, which manages the incendiary holy site. The artifacts excavated from the mount, detailed in a paper and presentations at a conference at Hebrew University, are said to include olive pits, animal bones, and pottery fragments dating to the time of the First Temple, between the 8th and 6th centuries BCE. Archaeologists have previously found a limited number of artifacts from First Temple period Jerusalem, but none of those finds were uncovered atop the mount itself. Rather, they were recovered from the Ophel excavations to the south of the mount, and from the Temple Mount Sifting Project, which examines rubble credibly believed to have been removed from the holy site and dumped in the nearby Kidron Valley. It's the first time that we've found artifacts from this period in situ on the Temple Mount, Yuval Baruch, the head of the Israel Antiquities Authority Jerusalem region, said Thursday of the discoveries. As far as the biblical period is concerned, the Temple Mount is a tabula rasa. Nobody knows anything, said Baruch, who headed the archaeological work. It's still very limited, but the tiny fragments of clay and bone are at least something. it exists. The digs at the mount were carried out between 2007 and the past year after the Waqf requested authorization from Israel to perform maintenance work on infrastructure servicing the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dome of the Rock, the main structures situated atop the Temple Mount. Previous Waqf projects carried out on the Temple Mount, such as construction of the Marwani Mosque in the late 1990s, did not involve cooperation with archaeologists and resulted in the destruction of antiquities and severe tensions between Israel and the Islamic authorities. Excavation of a trench for electric cables in 2007 allowed archaeologists the first opportunity to delve below the surface of the contested holy site since Israel captured it in the 1967 Six-Day War. All work was conducted with police escort due to the sensitivity of the site. The finds on the Temple Mount itself range from a previously undocumented monumental structure believed to be from the 11th and 12th centuries, the period preceding and including the Crusades, to artifacts from Roman times and, unprecedentedly in situ, finds from as far back as the First Temple period. Among the most significant of those finds, dug up during the laying of the power cable approximately 400 feet southeast of the Dome of the Rock, was a jumble of remains dating to the First Temple period. This layer included pottery fragments characterized in the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, as well as animal bones and charred olive pits. Another segment of the same trench turned up a Roman coin dating to 383 CE and iron arrowheads, which the authors said could be rare evidence of activity in the Roman period in the courtyard between the raised part of the Temple Mount and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Solomon's legacy. Solomon's rise to kingship begins with his lineage. According to Matthew 1:6, and Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Urias. This passage establishes Solomon as the son of David and Bathsheba, a union marked by complex precedents. David, described as a man after God's own heart in Acts 13:22, passes on his legacy to Solomon, setting the stage for a reign defined by grandeur and wisdom. Solomon's ascension was not without its challenges. His path to the throne involved political maneuvering and securing royal approval. While the New Testament does not detail this, the books of Kings and Chronicles in the Old Testament depict Solomon's anointing by the prophet Nathan and the high priest Zadok, solidifying his claim as king. Solomon's wisdom is one of his most celebrated attributes, referenced in several New Testament passages. For instance, Luke 11:31 recounts how the queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them. For she came from the utmost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here. This reflects the widespread recognition of Solomon's wisdom, which drew international attention, including that of the Queen of Sheba. In Matthew 12:42, it reiterates, "The queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it. For she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, a greater than Solomon is here." Solomon was known for his ability to dispense justice and offer profound insights, which are paramount to his legacy. His wisdom is extensively captured in the Book of Proverbs and the Song of Solomon, illustrating moral teachings and poetic musings. One of Solomon's most notable achievements was the construction of the Temple in Jerusalem, often referred to as Solomon's Temple. Acts 7:47 succinctly states, "But Solomon built him an house," highlighting Solomon's role in creating a central place of worship for Israel. This temple became a powerful symbol of God's presence among his people, and a central location for Israelite worship practices. The temple complex included various notable structures, including Solomon's porch. John 10:23 mentions, "And Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch," indicating its enduring significance and utilitarian function long after Solomon's time. Acts further illustrates its importance post-Christ, as seen in Acts 5:12. and by the hands of the apostles were many signs and wonders wrought among the people, and they were all with one accord in Solomon's porch. Solomon's wealth and splendor were legendary. In Matthew 6:29, it is noted, "And yet I say unto you, that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." This comparison elevates nature's beauty above Solomon's riches, reflecting Jesus' teaching on divine provision and the transient nature of earthly wealth. Solomon's wealth and grandeur were not merely for display, but also influenced his capacity to rule and administer justice effectively. His affluence enabled him to embark on extensive construction projects and foster trade relationships, significantly impacting Israel's economy and regional influence. Solomon's life and reign serve as a potent reminder of the complexities of wisdom, wealth, and divine favor. Despite his wisdom and accomplishments, Solomon's later years were marked by deviations from his pious beginnings as recorded in the Old Testament. This duality reminds readers of the need for ongoing faithfulness to God's commandments. The New Testament references to Solomon often draw comparisons between Jesus and Solomon, emphasizing that Jesus embodies greater wisdom and divine fulfillment. Luke 12:27, for instance, illustrates this through natural beauty, stating, "Consider the lilies how they grow. They toil not, they spin not. And yet I say unto you that Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." This comparison serves to magnify Jesus' teachings and life over the traditional symbols of wealth and wisdom. Solomon's pursuit of wealth and power led him to form political alliances through marriage with many foreign women. While these alliances may have been motivated by strategic considerations, they ultimately compromised his faith and integrity. The foreign wives introduced their own religious practices and beliefs, which included idol worship and pagan rituals. Over time, he succumbed to their influence, allowing idolatry to take root in his kingdom. The presence of multiple wives from different cultures and religious backgrounds contributed to the erosion of Solomon's devotion to God. His willingness to compromise his faith and engage in practices contrary to his own beliefs resulted in a spiritual decline. This aspect of Solomon's life serves as a cautionary tale, illustrating the dangers of compromising our values and faith for the pursuit of personal gain. Solomon's pursuit of wealth and idolatry had far-reaching consequences. Despite his initial devotion to God, his actions led to the division of the kingdom after his death. The repercussions of his choices and the spiritual decline under his reign had a lasting impact on the nation of Israel. His story serves as a warning about the potential dangers of materialism and idolatry in our own lives. Material wealth, while not inherently wrong, can easily become an idol when it consumes our thoughts, actions, and priorities. The relentless pursuit of wealth and possessions can distract us from our spiritual journey, leading to a shallow and empty existence. Additionally, idolatry goes beyond the worship of physical idols. It can manifest as the worship of money, power, success, or any other object or pursuit that takes precedence over our relationship with God. When we prioritize material wealth and worldly desires over our spiritual well-being, we risk losing sight of our true purpose and the values that bring fulfillment and meaning to life. Solomon's experience teaches us that true wealth and fulfillment lie in our relationship with God and the pursuit of righteousness. It prompts us to evaluate our own lives and consider the extent to which we prioritize material possessions and worldly achievements. Are we allowing these pursuits to overshadow our spiritual growth and our commitment to God and others? King Solomon's throne. As soon as Ahasuerus proclaimed himself king of Persia, he decided to use King Solomon's throne, which had been captured from Jerusalem, as his own. King Solomon's throne was the most wonderful throne that any king ever sat upon. It was fashioned of ivory and covered with gold. It was set with rubies, sapphires, emeralds, and other precious stones that shone with the most brilliant, the most dazzling, the most fascinating hues and colors. 6 steps led to the seat, and each step served to remind the king of one of the 6 special commandments that the kings of Israel were commanded to observe. On the first step, a golden lion lay, facing a golden ox on the opposite side. On the second step, a golden wolf faced a golden lamb. On the third step, a golden tiger faced a golden camel. On the fourth, a golden eagle faced a golden peacock. On the fifth, a golden cat faced a golden rooster, and on the sixth, a golden hawk faced a golden dove. Higher still, above the throne, a golden dove held a golden hawk in its beak. On the side, rising over the throne, stood an exquisite menorah of pure gold, decorated with golden cups, knobs, flowers, blossoms, and petals. On each side of the menorah, 7 branches turned upwards. On the branches of one side were engraved the names of the 7 fathers of the world: Adam, Noah, Shem, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, with Eof in the center. On the other 7 branches of the menorah, the names of the most pious men were engraved: Levi, Kehot, and Amram, Moshe and Aaron, Eldad and Medad, with Chur in the center. On each side of the throne, there was a special golden chair, one for the high priest and one for the Sagan, assistant high priest, surrounded by 70 golden chairs for the 70 elders of the Sanhedrin, Supreme Court judges. 24 golden vines formed a huge canopy above the throne. When King Solomon stepped upon the throne, a mechanism was set in motion. As soon as he stepped upon the first step, the golden ox and the golden lion each stretched out 1 foot to support him and help him rise to the next step. On each side, the animals helped the king up until he was comfortably seated upon the throne. No sooner was he seated than a golden eagle brought the great crown and held it just above King Solomon's brow, so that it should not weigh heavily on his head. Thereupon the golden dove flew over the holy ark and brought out a tiny scroll of the Torah and placed it in King Solomon's lap, in accordance with the commandment of the Torah, that the Torah shall always be with the king and should guide him in his reign over the Jewish people. The high priest, the Sagan, and all the 70 elders would rise to greet the king, and would sit down to hear the cases brought for judgment. King Solomon's throne was the talk of all the reigning kings and princes. They came to marvel at its wonders and admire its beauty. Many years later, when King Pharaoh Neshe invaded the land of Yehuda, he carried away this wonderful throne. But when he set his foot on the first step, the golden lion gave him such a kick in the thigh that he toppled over and remained a cripple for life. That is why he was named Neche, the lame one. Still later, when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple and subsequently conquered Egypt as well, he carried the throne away to Babylon. But when he tried to ascend it, the lion threw him over, and he did not venture to sit on it again. Later, King Darius of Persia conquered Babylon and carried the throne with him to Media. Now when Ahasuerus tried to ascend the throne, he too got a kick in the pants and toppled down. Ahasuerus did not try to sit on it again. Instead, he sent for a team of great Egyptian engineers and ordered them to construct for him a throne similar to King Solomon's. For nearly 3 years, the great Egyptian masters worked on a throne for the king, and at last, they completed it. On this occasion, Ahasuerus ordered a great feast. King Solomon's monumental Jerusalem. The Psalms repeatedly refer to the gates of Jerusalem, some of the most prominent symbols of the Holy City. Reading these passages, it is easy to picture the Jaffa Gate or the Damascus Gate in the Old City. But these are not the gates the psalmists referenced. They were speaking of the gates of the original city conquered by King David and significantly developed by Solomon, Hezekiah, and Josiah. We might know the precise location of one of these ancient gates, as well as its associated straight wall and projecting tower. Analyzing the archaeology of all 3 features provides an impressive snapshot of King Solomon's monumental building program in Jerusalem. The wall. The Lord loveth the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. The psalmist believed God took a special interest in the gates of ancient Jerusalem, which were located in Zion. Zion in the Bible refers to a long, crescent-shaped north-south ridge bordered on the east by the Kidron Valley and on the west by the Tyropaion Valley. During the time of Abraham, when Jerusalem, then called Salem, was first established, settlement was located at the southern end of this ridge, centered around the Gihon Spring. This settlement still existed in the same location 6 centuries later when Israel conquered the Promised Land under Joshua. It was then inhabited by Jebusites and called Jebus. About 400 years later, around 1000 BCE, King David and his army laid siege on Jebus and took the city. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion. The same is the city of David. From this time on, the Bible generally refers to the most southern, most ancient part of Jerusalem as the city of David. Both archaeology and the biblical record show that David fortified the existing, relatively small city of Jerusalem on the Zion Ridge. His greatest building project was the new royal quarters north of the city. When King David died, the kingdom of Israel was powerful, secure, and prosperous. This allowed his successor, Solomon, to undertake massive construction projects in Jerusalem and across the kingdom. The house of the Lord, the spectacular temple at Jerusalem, became world famous. But notice that in addition to building the temple, his own palace and numerous fortified cities, Solomon built the Wall of Jerusalem. If it was anything like the palace and the temple, it would have been an impressive structure. The palace, the temple, and the wall were part of Jerusalem and therefore built on the Zion Ridge. Where? The geography of Jerusalem reveals the answer. Deep valleys to the south, east, and west of the city would have logically forced new development further north. The Bible refers to this part of Jerusalem's topography as the Ophel. The meaning of this word is somewhat obscure, but it can be defined as a swelling or raised mound. The Bible and geography indicate that this northward expansion is where Solomon built the temple, his palace, and the Wall of Jerusalem. What does archaeology tell us? In 2010, excavations performed by Dr. Mazar on the Ophel, sponsored by Daniel Mintz and Meredith Berkman, uncovered a 34-meter-long, 2.5-meter-wide portion of a massive wall. This wall was dated to the 10th century BCE. Up until this excavation, it was believed that this extra length of city wall, also known as the Straight Wall, was built after Solomon by possibly 200 years. However, by excavating the stratified layers against the base of the wall, Dr. Mazar's team learned that this city wall was built during the 10th century. The Jerusalem Gatehouse, the relatively recent discovery of Solomon's large wall, complements another massive structure, one that began to be excavated decades earlier, the Ophel City Gate. While the Bible records that Jerusalem had many gates, the Ophel City Gate is the only thus far discovered and securely dated to the First Temple period. Several gates from the biblical period have been found in Israel. As previously mentioned, gatehouses have been excavated in Hazor, Megiddo, Gezer, cities listed as part of Solomon's building program. The gatehouses in these cities are massive, with 6 chambers each. Others discovered have 4. When comparing the Ophel Gate in Jerusalem with the Palace Gate at Megiddo, Dr. Mazar noted that the lengths, width of the central passages, thicknesses of the walls, and sizes of the chambers are virtually identical. This seems to indicate that the 2 gatehouses were built according to an identical blueprint, most likely originating from the same architectural office, she wrote, discovering the Solomonic Wall in Jerusalem. The dating of the Ophel Gatehouse, however, has come under debate by other scholars, especially since Dr. Mazar's death in 2021. Obviously, both of these views conflict with Mazar's dating of the entire gatehouse to the 10th century BCE. Can her dating be defended? To understand why she dated the entire gatehouse to the 10th century, we must examine 3 distinct features: the eastern wall, the central passageway, and the southeastern chamber. First, it's important to note, Mazar found what is indisputably 10th century pottery in all 3 areas. The Bible relates that King Solomon reigned in Jerusalem for 40 years, during which Jerusalem experienced development and significant population growth. This means that the 10th century pottery Dr. Mazar found is most likely associated with Solomon. Any attempt to redate the Ophel gatehouse out of the 10th century must explain the presence of 10th century pottery in a gatehouse they claim was built much later. Let's examine each of the three sections of the Ophel gatehouse. The Eastern Wall. The full extent of the huge Eastern Wall was uncovered in the 2009-10 excavation. Though there are some slight variations in the wall's construction style, for example, a correctional course of stones about halfway up the wall, its look and design are generally consistent from top to bottom. Like all First Temple period walls in the Ophel, the Eastern Wall is built directly on bedrock. After the construction of the Eastern Wall, a massive earth fill was brought in to raise the floor level to the same height as the gatehouse entrance. The pottery found in the lower portion of this fill was dated to the time of Solomon. Using this pottery, Dr. Mazar dated the Eastern Wall to the same period. A separate 4-meter-high wall abuts the north end of the Eastern Wall. This wall is the same height as the gatehouse entrance. Dr. Mazar interpreted this to be a wall that was built to hold the earth fill in place inside the projecting tower that protected the entrance to the gate. The fact that this supporting wall reaches the same height as the Eastern Wall at the gate entrance is additional proof this was a walkway. Both Winderbaum and Mazar showed that the pottery found in the lowest fills against the Eastern Wall clearly dates to the Solomonic period. Winderbaum believes the Eastern Wall's lowest courses were built separately and earlier from the upper courses of the gatehouse. Dr. Mazar disagreed. She believed the entire Eastern Wall was one unit and was constructed at the same time. The reason Winderbaum believes the upper wall was built later is that pottery sherds in the upper parts of the fill dated to the later period. But this doesn't mean the upper wall had to be built separately. The presence of later period pottery in the upper level isn't unexpected. It was likely imported with fill that would have been occasionally brought in to raise the floor, which wore down over time. Importantly, the lowest levels of the fill did not produce any late pottery. Winderbaum also believes the correctional course halfway up the wall is another indication it is a later addition. Finkelstein's view is different still. He wrote, "If the latest sherds in this fill indeed date to the iron they are in contrast to the lowest fill below the gatehouse." This does not address the issue, but perhaps it is a slight admission that the fill against the wall belongs to the Solomonic period. While he concedes the presence of Solomonic period pottery, Finkelstein has a plausible, though creative, suggestion for how it might have found its way into the fill. Indeed, the earth for the fill could have been brought here at a later phase of the Iron Age from a dumped debris with Iron IA sherds. While possible, the sheer mass of Solomonic sherds without a single later sherd makes this extremely unlikely. Furthermore, if, as Finkelstein believes, Jerusalem